years affects the pension. For example, if you have a cost of, say, 2% per year, this could reduce your pension, let's say, twice at the moment when you retire. Do you see my point?
No.
Okay.
I don't know. If someone saw it and can explain it to me.
No, I'll explain it again.
Don't take it where you move your hand, move the other hand, take it out from the book, but don't move this one. You see, that's very important.
I'm not a rock singer, so.
Okay.
Okay, so the question is, how exactly does the system manage the costs, you know, for administering, for investing, so on? So how do you keep them low?
The cost, okay.
Because
It's clear, don't confuse. The cost of the system is reduced by competition about the private management companies. A key element of the system is that total free entry for companies to manage pension funds. The workers chooses the company. But for example, if this university wants to create a pension fund company in Chile, you can do it tomorrow. Or your family wants to create, because if anyone believes that the commissions, for example, are high, I always say that in New York or in Berlin, well, go there and create a pension fund company and manage Chilean funds. So the key element in a free market economy, as you know very well, for any cost to go down is competition. Maximize competition. How do you maximize competition? By keeping the door open to any private provider. In that sense, I had to have a big fight with the Chilean banks, because the Chilean banks, and the anecdote is told in one of these books, the Chilean banks wanted only Chilean banks to manage their money. So they tried to pressure me with wrong arguments of why will the foreigners come here to manage the workers' money, but what they wanted was to have an oligopoly. They wanted to be 5, 6, 7 of them. They play golf together, and they could set the commission very high and take out the money of the workers. So I said, no way. I said, this is free entry. If you want to create a pension fund, you can do, but also can a Bulgarian bank or a Spanish bank, well, there are two big Spanish banks there. So anyone can create, because in a free market economy, you see, if one company has costs that are too high, either because they are inefficient or because they want to produce high profits for the owners, in a free market economy there comes a new company to produce that good at a lower cost. That is Adam Smith 1, you see. So the key element is competition. And it has worked that way, because initially, you see, the first year, of course, the costs were much higher than now, because the investment in computers, in offices, was fixed, and the amount of money that they were managing was small. But after 28 years, the cost has gone down like that, and today it is what is called 50 basis points. That is half of 1% of the assets managed. In a funded system, you have to talk about the cost as a proportion of assets managed. So today, the average administrative cost is half of 1% of assets managed. In other words, if the funds gives you 10% return, you deduct half a point and you get 9.5 return. So half of 1% administrative cost is very low. Most mutual funds in America, for example, cost 1.5%, even 2%. So half of 1% is very low. But it should be lower still, if possible, by maximizing competition. And what I believe is that the government should have a clear eye on whether the pension fund managers are competing among themselves and not trying to make oligopolies of any kind. I am totally against monopolies and oligopolies. You see, the private sector has to compete among themselves, and that's why, as I said, I was adamant at the very beginning in the law to have free entry into the industry. So very good question, very important question, because generally you see the private sector try to have an oligopoly. They don't like competition, and they make a lot of arguments. So what you should watch is, you should always keep the door open to new companies, so that the competition among them will keep the cost as low as possible. Yes?
My name is George, hello. I have a question. What about the existing pensioners?
Okay.
Where does the money come from for their pensions?
I deliberately explained you the new system, but I did not explain you how we went from the old to the new system, from the state system to the, that's called the transition. And we define three basic rules for the transition that are very important. The first one is that we promised every retiree that we will keep the promises of the old system. In other words, we will deliver one way or another the pensions the system was already paying. When I went into television, I called this rule, we will not take away your grandmother check. It's an easy way to put it. You see, we will not damage grandmothers, of course, because it will be completely unfair and cruel to do that. You cannot just tell grandmothers, look, the system is in deficit, Bismarck was wrong, and therefore I will reduce your benefit. Now, from where did we get the money? Well, that is precisely the challenge of fiscal policy. We did a lot of things. We reduced wasteful government spending. You see, every government wastes a lot of money. You see, the number of, well, defense. I always make the joke that is true. Whenever the Chilean Navy wanted, you see, the Chilean Navy never had a carrier. A carrier is those ships with planes. Huh? Carrier, the ship. And Argentina had one carrier. Huh? So the Chilean Navy wanted to have a carrier just because Argentina had a carrier. Now the only detail is that the carrier costs, I don't know, $1 trillion, you see, because there are these huge ships with airplanes. So we didn't need a carrier. So every time the Navy wanted to buy a carrier, in the cabinet I told to the admiral, no, there is no money. We're paying our grandmother's checks. So for 10 years I kept the Navy without a carrier because we are paying our grandmother's checks. And finally Chile has never had a carrier. And we never needed a carrier. Nor do we need those big sophisticated planes that the Americans sell us. You see, we don't need them. We shouldn't have those fighter jets that cost $300 million each one. And sometimes they are playing the pilots and the planes go down. You see, on the day a plane goes down, you lost $300 million. The cost of the subway of Sofia, for example. So you could buy a subway, you could have a subway system or a fighter plane. I prefer a subway system. So that was one. But there are a lot of other ways. You see diplomats around. I always joke because I go around the world and I receive a call from I hope the Chilean ambassador is not here. But there is always a Chilean ambassador in some country who says, well, we don't have nothing to do, so can we invite you to dinner, whatever. So you say, no, I have a lot to do, so thank you very much. So I always find a Chilean ambassador in some countries that has nothing to do because today you see there is something called the email. So when the ministry wants to communicate with another ministry, they write an email. So really you don't need so much ambassadors. And our embassies with 100 people, 50 people, we have in Paris, a big embassy. For what? You see, so I always joke that, okay, we may need a few ambassadors, you see, or to give these things that are called the visas, something that to me is completely outdated. Also, I would eliminate visas and passports, of course. But anyway, let's suppose that you have to put a little stamp. You may have one person, half a person, half a day, maybe, to put stamps. But all our countries have this huge diplomatic corps. Wherever I go around the world, I always ask, who owns this building? All the big buildings in Paris are embassies. The other day I was going, there was a beautiful palace. They told me the Polish embassy. I said, but poor Poland has suffered so much. Why don't they sell that embassy? And they have a little apartment somewhere in the suburbs of Paris. No. Poland has an embassy in the Saint-Germain-des-Prés, the most beautiful palace. Well, every country, because, well, we could say, okay, the Americans, the British, but no, every poor country compete with the size of their embassies, you see. And the amount of ambassadors. just joking a little, of course. But you see, I look at the government expenditure and I can cut a lot without cutting the essential. You see, there should be more money in hospitals. The drama is that hospitals all around the world, there are no enough things to cure the people, and yet you have these huge embassies. And fighter planes, against whom are you going to fight with fight? Chile doesn't have any, Chile cannot fight, you see, because they just put it into the sea. So they move a little this and we are swimming here. And the only other country, you see, we have to swim to Japan. You see, Japan is, so it's very far. So we have not had any war. I believe that we should reduce military spending to a minimum. And I have nothing against the military. I'm just saying that today, you see, we are a peaceful continent here. So why are we buying carriers and fighter planes against each other? Well, there are a lot of. So first of all, government expenditure. Now the second rule that is very important is that we privatize a lot of state-owned companies that the country had. And we did something that was very important, is that we first created the pension funds in 1980, and 6 years later, we began to privatize the big state-owned companies, the energy generation, energy distribution, energy transmission, fixed telephone, mobile telephone, etc., etc., etc. And why we did it that way? Because if we privatize 5, 6 years after the creation of the pension funds, the big buyers of those companies were the workers through the pension funds. And once the company was privatized, generally the company goes up in value. The private sector manages much better a telephone company than a government minister, and therefore those companies' value has gone up 10 times in Chile, 20 times, 30 times. And the beauty is that the increasing value, instead of going to one single foreign investor, for example, has gone in large degree to the workers through the pension funds. So all this has created the fiscal possibility of paying the benefits of the old people and financing the transition without raising any tax rate and without having any fiscal problem. Okay? The lady there had a question, yes? At the back.
Hello, my name is Nadia. My question is, what happens if I save in my personal account some money, and what happens if there are more than I need in my pension time?
More than you need?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, first time I received that question. Chilean people don't have that problem. There is something that's called giving away. Spending it in a big party. Giving it to your friend. No, come on, I can explain you a lot of. A woman who doesn't know how to spend money.
No, really. Do they
No,
go to the government?
What do you want to say exactly?
Do those money go to the government or what?
No!
Can I give them to my children or what?
Of course. It's your money. You can do what you're. If you have more. So first of all, of course, it doesn't go to the government. Do I look like a man who will give the money to the world? No. The government has nothing to do here. If you were to die, for example, because the best example is, imagine a man who is 65, retires and has $500,000. And there are some professionals in Chile that have $500,000 in the retirement saving account. And suppose that man or woman is a heavy smoker, never makes any exercise, misbehave in life, so dies 2 years afterwards. Well, that person has the possibility of leaving the whole money to the widow and to the children, the whole capital, unless they have bought an insurance. But if they keep the ownership of the money that person should do, all that is inheritance, and nothing goes to the government. But anyway, I'm so glad that you think that a problem may be accumulating so much money. It's a wonderful thing to hear. Because generally you see people, you're an optimistic person, you will go far in life. But don't worry, there are always ways to share that money. Another question, there was someone here? Yes, sir?
Yeah, thank you for the talk. My question is, how exactly do you manage to decide about which investments are risky and which are not? Because there's naturally a correlation between the risk and the amount of management that's received later on.
Well, basically by prudent man rules, you see, for example, there are these ratings of bonds and stocks. So, for example, we said from the very beginning, the money can only be invested in AAA bonds. That is a decision. Now, AAA bonds give a lower rate of return than junk bonds, of course. So, but we always went in favor of safety. And as you can imagine, I am very happy of having taken that decision these days. See, every way we went in favor of safety. Now, as you say very well, sacrificing, you see, those banks in New York that are failing now, Lehman Brothers and all that, they had rates of return of 40, 50% a year before. That is huge rate of return, and now they value zero. So they had huge rate of return, but now they went bankrupt. No, in Chile you cannot have 50% rate of return and go bankrupt. We rather, the rate of return will move in the next year maybe between 4 and 12%, whatever. But that is a reasonable rate of return. So here it's important not to have excessive greed. You see, the principle of the system is not that you will get stratospheric rates of return. As I explained initially, the principle of the system, the real essential thing is the defined contribution, is that you save for old age, and what you will get is what you saved. Now, if that money gets a rate of return of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, hallelujah. But that is not the essence of the system. As I explained, Chilean workers, even if the system were to give you a 1% real rate of return, I still will prefer a system of personal account rather than the government. Even with a 1% real rate of return, I prefer to have my money in my account and know how it grows. So we put the rules, you see, in a very conservative way. Now, we can go into all the detail, but there are ways of managing things conservatively, and there are ways of managing things less conservatively. I remember when I explained this reform on television, I always say this is a revolutionary reform. That is, I am revolutionizing Bismarck's system in a peaceful way for the system of the Red Book, but with a conservative execution. I use it at the line, this is a radical approach with a conservative execution. I believe that the reformers who are successful in the world are those who have a vision. And if the problem is important, you need to make a radical reform. If the problem is not important, you don't make a radical reform. Of course it's not. But if the problem is at the root, you have to change the paradigm. You have to change, you have to have the courage to change how the system works. And we change the essence of the system, the pay-as-you-go to a personal account. But once we did the decision, we moved from one to the other in a prudent way, in a conservative way, with care. With care. If you are a revolutionary and at the same time you have a revolutionary or imprudent execution, you end up in total disaster, as so many reformers in the world have done. So a revolutionary approach or vision with a conservative, prudent execution. That is my way of looking at public policy reform, because you have to be prudent because you are changing other people's lives. So you have, again, a moral responsibility to be prudent with other people's lives. You don't have, you see, the right to gamble other people's lives. Yes? Last question? Or more? Yes?
I have no doubt that this system quantify the political costs of that imposing and introducing that system. And that actually was not the example of really a democratic country, if I'm mistaken, just say. Was it easy to pay these costs in a country where some political freedoms were restricted? Then in a democratic country that you have free actors, you have very powerful trade unions, you have opposition very powerful to some extent. So what was the link between one and another?
Well, that is an excellent final question. Thank you very much for raising it, because it's a legitimate question. Now, regrettably, that it starts from a false premise. You see, sometimes your false premise is that we didn't have a democratic system in order to create personal accounts. It seems to be that premise, because you said the cost of creating personal account was not having, and there you're totally wrong. Regrettably, we will have to go into history here. We had, I will give you the outlines, and this is again very complicated and historic, and people are very passionate about this in Chile. But let me tell you the outline, because probably you have read a completely different story. We had, in 1970, elected a Marxist communist government with 36.2% of the vote. And the second party came with 36% of the vote. So the first one was 2 decimals above the other. In the Chilean Constitution, when you have such a result, Congress has the right to appoint the first or the second as president. So here's the first point. The man who won that election was President Salvador Allende. So he was not elected by the people, but by the Congress. Congress could have elected him or could have elected the second one. Congress decided to give him the presidency even though he had 0.2% more than the other one, because he was a little ahead. But again, the Constitution could have allowed him to choose. So he was elected president, and we had President Salvador Allende. Now, regrettably, President Salvador Allende was, as he defined himself, a Marxist-Leninist president, defined by himself, with the Communist Party controlling the government. And as Lenin has said, and probably you know him very well, and the goal of the Communist Party is to impose the dictatorship of the proletariat. So it's clear that it's not changing the pensions. No, it's to imposing the dictatorship of the proletariat, supposedly for good intentions, whatever, but it's imposing a dictatorship. Now, with 36.2% of the vote, you cannot impose a dictatorship unless you violate the Constitution. And that's what the communists did in the Czech Republic, in Poland, in Hungary after the Second World War, as we all know now. Now, they tried to do exactly the same in Chile, as they had done already in the 40s, but they tried to do this in the 70s. So for 2 years and a half, the Allende government was pushing the limits of the Constitution in order to destroy the free press. They tried to nationalize the main newspaper called El Mercurio, as you probably know. They tried to nationalize all the education. So you begin pushing the frontiers in order to have only one party, the Communist Party, one newspaper, Pravda, one school. Well, I understand you know something about this. Now, thanks God, the Chilean Congress, the same Congress that had elected Allende president, had the courage to pass a resolution in August 22, 1973, that you have read. You have read it? No, never, of course, no. Because it's important, because when you talk of another country, it's very important to read all these papers. This is history. Well, I will send it to you in English or in Bulgarian. August 22, 1973. The Chamber of Deputies of Chile meets, and a resolution is presented saying President Allende was elected democratically, no doubt about that, as Adolf Hitler was elected democratically, no doubt about that. But due to his behavior in the last 2.5 years, he has violated the Constitution on 20 different grounds. 20. And it's listed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, up to 20. And therefore, he has become an illegitimate president. And therefore, we ask the commanders of the armed forces to end up immediately this situation. It was a call to the armed forces to remove the president who had violated the Constitution. I always say, imagine the German parliament having done the same in 1933, because as you may remember, Hitler was elected democratically, totally democratically. And then he passed in the German parliament the famous enabling acts that gave him total power. Imagine if the German parliament, called the Reichstag, had approved at that moment the same resolution than the Chilean. Would you have supported the removal of Hitler or not? I would, incidentally. And 40 million people will be alive today. So the Chilean Congress did that resolution, asked the armed forces, and regrettably the armed forces, the only way to do that is to remove the president. So democracy was destroyed by President Allende. The Chamber of Deputies certified it with the resolution of August 22nd, and the military, who were the only force in Chile that could have removed Allende, removed Allende. Now, we're very sorry about that. If you could find a way of halting a dictatorship by any other means, by the angels coming from heaven, by Superman, by Batman, but regrettably the only way to save a country from a tyrant like Hitler or Allende, or eventually Chavez in Venezuela, was to remove him, because tyrants do not respond to public opinion. So democracy, you see, was broken dead. And as you see, up to now, this has nothing to do with pensions at all. So you have then a situation where a revolutionary government, in the case of Chile was headed by the 4 commanders of the armed forces, together with civilians, begin to reconstruct the economy and the society broken down by this very painful process. It is not something to be enjoyed. It's a painful process. A lot of people suffer, a lot of people die, because regrettably civil wars happen like that. Now, in the reconstruction of this economy and this democracy, because you said that government was not necessarily democratic. No, it was not democratic, it was more. It was creator of a democracy. It's even more. It's more, in my view, it's more valuable to create a democracy than to simply administer it. You have inherited a democracy. We have created a democracy. It's interesting when you arrive, incidentally, I arrived after all this. I was at Harvard when all this was happening. I came back to Chile in '75 after the Civil War was over to help create a democracy. And in the meantime, create a good pension system as a side job. And we did it because we created a constitution, the Constitution of 1980, as you know very well probably. And then we set up a constitutional path, and on March 11, 1990, that government that created the Chilean democracy of today gave back power to the civilians once the country has been built up again economically, socially, and politically. That's why the country now is in total peace, and despite being long and narrow, has the highest per capita income. So, your question has nothing to do. You see, the fact that the government at that moment was a pre-democracy government, a builder of democracy government, a non-democracy, whatever you want to put it, has nothing to do with pension reform. There is no cost of a political cost of creating the pension reform. The government was there anyway. So it could either have been like 100 military governments in Latin America who stay in power for 5, 10, 15 years and do nothing, or during that period you can create a free market economy, a pension reform, etc., etc. But there is no cost of the pension reform politically, because it has nothing to do. It's not that the Allende government was removed in order to create personal accounts. Not even Lenin has said that, you see. No. The Allende government was removed because it was violating the Constitution. Now, that is our system, you see, our decision in Chile, and that this decision in Chile was approved supposedly by a large majority of the people in Chile. And we are very happy of not having had 50 years of communism. Now, I agree that some other people could decide to have 50 years of communism and be free after 50 years, like Cubans, for example, are in that case. Fidel Castro is now exactly 48 years in power. 48 years in power. So the Cubans are still waiting for the transition. We Chileans, thanks God again, the Chilean Congress decided to stop the process before. But if another country wants to live 50 years and stop it afterwards, it's each country's decision. Our country did it that way, but it has nothing to do with either pension reform or free market reforms. It has nothing to do. The political process was destroyed because of a completely different circumstance. But I am glad that you asked, because I know that you may have had a completely different vision, and this is my vision. Check it, but read the August 22nd, 73 resolution, because it's impressive, really. It's a Congress who tells a government, you are violating the Constitution. Now, the best thing for Chile would have been if that government had then said, well, I will then not violate the Constitution any longer. I will forget Lenin, will forget Stalin, will forget Bakunin, will forget Engels, and from now on I will behave like an angel, you see? That would have been the best. But those things do not happen, regrettably. The Hitlers of this world do not stop under that. So sometimes you have to confront a tyrant removing him. Even though it's painful and difficult, but it's the noble thing to do. We prefer not to live 50 years under a dictatorship of any sort. And the Chilean system was not a dictatorship because it precisely was a government creating a democracy. No dictatorship, of course, gives away power. So by definition, it's a country that is in an exceptional circumstance, in a revolutionary situation. And from the first day says, we will have democracy at the end. Now, it could be debated, and it will be debated forever, if the number of years to have that return to democracy was too much or not too much. You see, there are some people in Chile who said it should have been longer, and some people who say it should have been shorter. Well, number of years are always debatable. And so, but the essence of the Chilean situation was that democracy was destroyed by President Allende. The military saved Chile from communism first, then created the best economy in the continent, and then created a constitution that created the best democracy in the continent, and Chile today is the most peaceful, stable, and richest country in Latin America. Not a bad result. Another question, or we finish here? We finish here. Thank you very much. See you in Chile again, huh? We go? Thank you very much, huh? It was nice to meet you. Dominica! What are you giving you? Yes, I will see you tomorrow.
Yes, of course.
You want your microphone?